Hey guys, welcome to Behind the Seams podcast. I'm Nunzio Signore, and today's a great day. One of my former employees, Ethan Newton, is on the show. Ethan is currently the assistant coach at Fairleigh Dickinson University. He joined and actually rejoined the Knights last year after having spent over a year here at RPP as the director of hitting. Prior to RPP, Ethan was an assistant coach on Rob DiToma's staff at Fairleigh Dickinson. He arrived in FDU after spending the past 2 years as a volunteer assistant at the University of Hartford. Prior to Hartford, Ethan spent 2 years at Allegany College of Maryland from 2015 to 2017, where he was elevated from assistant coach to associate head baseball coach. As a player, Ethan started and played in all but one game during his 4 years of collegiate baseball at Allegany before transferring to Ohio University for his 2 final years. Before we begin, I just want to say that Ethan is a very multifaceted guy. He absorbed any and all the information while he was here, and he was the director of hitting here during the time he spent with us. And I believe he left as a different coach than when he started. I hope he did. He's like a sponge, really. I love these kind of guys. I miss having him around. He's really doing great things right now. And with that, I'd like to welcome Ethan to the show. Ethan, man, what's going on, my man?
Not a whole lot. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate the kind words.
Absolutely, man. So you miss us, man?
Every day, man. When I texted you the other day, I knew you were finishing up your workout. I feel like the day-to-day is
It
still
was amazing. You
my head.
texted me at like 9:45 and you said, "You're probably right now on the Airdyne." And I was. I was pedaling on the Airdyne and I was finishing up my workout. You even said finishing up your workout, which I thought was great, man. So let's get into it. So now that you're an assistant head coach, what's the day-to-day look like for you? Tell the listeners a little bit about what the day-to-day is for an assistant head coach at FDU.
Yeah, no, kind of having a routine is something in the past couple of years that I've taken a lot of pride in, and it's nothing crazy. I mean, I can deviate if I have to, but usually when I get in the morning, it's kind of administrative, operational type stuff. Answering some emails. I handle all of our CARA hours, which is just the accountable athletic related activities, and making sure everything's straight there. Then finishing up some practice planning. We go over it the day before as a staff, but anything that I feel needs to be tweaked or implemented, I'll knock that out, and then go out and set up some stuff for practice, get the machine set up for hitting and things like that. I like our schedule. We practice in the middle of the day around 1 o'clock, so it gives me some time in the morning and in the evening to do some other things. So then we'll go out for practice around 1. Guys might lift in the morning before practice or after practice. 2 days a week is after, one is before. So we'll swing over there for lift, and then in the evenings is usually knocking out some scouting reports if we're in the spring season, preparing for competition. And then, I live in Jersey City, which is anywhere from 45-minute to an hour drive from campus. So that's usually when I'll make, recruiting phone calls, or taking a trip to watch a recruit play. So, and then obviously game days is their own thing, but that's the kind of typical day to day right now.
I think it's great if it can be done to have those practices in the daytime for a couple reasons. One, guys can pick if they want to lift before they work out or after. Trying to play baseball in the morning and then try to find the time to lift. I find that guys have a lot easier time kind of letting it slide after that, but when they have that whole morning open, they really don't have an excuse. And I know from my point of view as a coach, that morning time is cool for me to get my head together instead of having to jump right up and get into playing ball. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we when we do lift in the morning, we usually have a little bit of time between lift and practice to where, some guys have classes and things like that, but the guys that don't can go get treatment. With our athletic trainer, they can show up to the field for some early work. So it really allows a lot of flexibility, but also again, the guys that are really good with their routines, they don't waste a whole lot of time in the day.
So let's talk about your guys. You joined FDU this past year, and FDU is now having a great season. Current record, I think, is 25-15-1. Let's review a couple hitting stats comparing 2022 to 2023. The team has had a similar number of hits per game, but a significant increase in extra base hits year over year. and corresponding RBIs. What do you attribute this to?
I think the first thing is honestly just experience. I mean, we have a lot of guys that have a lot of college at bats under their belt, and a lot of times that's just the way it happens. You kind of scuffle a little bit early on, especially if you're getting a lot of at bats as freshmen, which I saw some of these guys do, and then you figure out how to execute your plan and put together some good at bats, and then as you get more comfortable there, the power comes. So definitely having the experience helps, and then beyond that, I mean, these guys are just they're great with executing their plan. So I came back in the fall and they had a really good year last year, and I said, look, guys, I don't really want to change anything that's allowed y'all to have the success that you've had. It was actually quite the opposite. I kind of showed them where they had success in the zone, where they slugged a little bit and did some damage, and I just said, hey, I mean, if we can be really good at executing our plan when pitchers make pitches in this part of the zone, I think we'll be pretty successful as an offense. And they bought into that and really started to understand it, I think, towards the end of the fall after we had that meeting and into the spring. And I mean, it's just a testament to them for, how focused they are with their craft. And I mean, those guys hit, they love their craft. They love practicing. They love competing. And I think all of that's gone into the success that they've had so far this year.
Have you compared how hard the ball is being hit as compared to last year? Sometimes it seems like these extra base hits, a lot of times you can contribute that to better contact or maybe just a harder hit ball.
I don't. So we use Rapsodo a lot in the fall. I don't have like comparison metrics from the previous year, unfortunately. But we do have like zone data that we can look at. And I mean, that's really like, we don't talk a whole lot about like, oh, we want to slug, we want to hit the ball 500 feet, this and that. We kind of just, if the pitcher makes a mistake, that sort of provides the juice. We just have to move on time and, make sure that we're executing our plan and seeing the ball well. And, it'll find the gaps. It'll find its way over the fence. It'll kind of, the rest of that stuff takes care of itself a little bit.
Kudos to you for this. But when you got the job last year, you brought your guys in. And I know in the fall, we assessed all your players here at RPP, or most of them. We put them on Proteus, I believe, to check core, check their elasticity of their core and their power and their acceleration. And we put them up on the table and we did range of motion. And I really respected the fact that because you had come from here, you really understood the importance of getting a good movement blueprint on your guys, as well as some power. Can you tell us about how you put the assessment information into practical use?
Yeah, we, from a very like immediate standpoint, just having them do the mobility routines, their mobility series.
Each guy got a mobility sheet, right? Individualized. Yep. Right.
Yep.
Right.
And we'd have them do that a couple times a week, whether it was, before or after practice, before or after lift, just allowing them to get some of that stuff in. And some of them asked questions, and it was really trying to educate them on some of the information from their assessment. And if I didn't have the answer, which a lot of times I didn't, I'd hit up Zach or Phil or you and ask for some clarity there. So just doing their mobility series, what they got from their assessment, but also for me, just understanding like the individual and how that guy moves. So if he's a guy that's a little bit tighter and, he's a little more associated where that pivot point's more in the lumbar than the T-spine, I can't ask that guy to get into certain positions that maybe another guy can. So it just gave me an idea for their movement preferences and what their body wants to do, so I can make sure that the cues I'm giving them in the cage isn't something that their body can't do or that's going to make them uncomfortable. Because then if it's uncomfortable for them and it's not natural, well, now it's harder to focus on that baseball that's going to arrive at home plate in under a half a second. So just making sure that we're putting them in a position where they can succeed based on how they move as an individual.
And I think what a lot of people really don't understand is you don't have to overhaul a guy's mechanics. It's the little one or two things, the little adjustments that you can make that open up a whole can of worms for a guy as far as adjustability. Did your guys ever mention to you, hey, man, this is great, I really feel different?
Yeah. And, it's usually the guys that are a little more just obsessed with that stuff, whether they're in an exercise science degree, or maybe they dig into that stuff a little bit deeper. But yeah, definitely. I mean, and I loved having those conversations with guys, because I would tell them, like, look, I'm far from an expert, so if y'all have questions or if you notice something, like, let's just chop it up a little bit, and it might be something that's eye opening for me, or that I need to go back to Nunzio and the guys at RPP and ask them some questions, and try to figure something out that maybe I thought I knew, but they brought up some context, or a question that all right, maybe I need to go find out a little bit more about this.
Guys that are listening, I can't explain how important it is what this guy's doing. He's taking the knowledge that he got from a facility and he's using it, and he's not just taking it and just plastering it. He's using it, and if there's something he doesn't understand, he continues to go back and use the source as another source of information to further learn. I mean, this is what I did my whole life. I can see Ethan's a learner. He gets off on learning. It's the whole thing, every week, if you're not learning something, like for me personally, I feel like I die a little bit. You know what I mean? You took a really big interest in movement. Talk to us a little bit about some of the big things you pulled out of here movement-wise that you continue to use to this day. Like, I know thought process of when you're looking at a hitter, you have to have settled into some systems that you're using as far as the movement stuff that we talked about. Can you go through some of the big players that you pulled out of here that you use on a daily basis that could help maybe some of the other hitting coaches that are listening?
Before I got to RPP, it's funny, like, I kind of went back and, I used to put together these PowerPoint presentations just when I, felt like I kind of got to a new stage or a new understanding of movement or hitting or whatever it was. And I went back and looked at one that I did before RPP, and I wasn't far off, but it definitely wasn't, I needed more information, and I needed more, like, applicable information that actually mattered. So, I was looking at torso positioning and the pelvis and hinge patterns and all of that things, but I didn't really know how it all connected and went together and, like, truly applied to hitting. So, I felt like I was on the right track, but going to RPP just, it cleaned so many things up for me and gave me a much deeper understanding. And, I know we'll get into it here in a minute, but just understanding the importance of working with the proximal sections of the body, the middle of the body, and understanding how important, you hear it from even old school coaches, like, hey, be balanced. But once you really understand what that means, and you understand how important stability is for hitting, not just from a movement standpoint, but from a vision standpoint, that was something that was really eye-opening, and is that's at the front of my mind anytime that I'm working with the hitter.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I know when you were here, you and I talked a lot about how hitting initiates from the middle. I tell people all the time, everyone's always telling us, the swing, the pitch, everything starts from the ground up. It actually doesn't start from the ground up. It starts from the middle and goes into the ground. So everything is proximal to distal. Can you talk about how you use that a little bit in your hitting and how that has helped you with certain mechanical issues?
Yes, and it starts to, or in my opinion, with trying to help guys understand that concept first and foremost, and then they can really allow themselves to be athletic after that. So we use the tidal tanks a couple times a week, and try to help them.
Explain to the listeners what that is.
Yeah, so it's a water bag, and I'll fill it up anywhere from like 8 to 15 pounds of water. And if we're doing moves that are a little bit more about, like, pelvic stability, they'll ideally use the heavier ones. And if we're doing exercises that are more about, like, firing and moving fast, they'll use the ones that don't have as much water in them. But it's just kind of bringing some proprioception to them and getting them to feel certain things. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, like, the middle, so without going, like, too deep into the body parts and stuff like that, if the middle of your body is stable, around the pelvis, it's easier to activate those muscle slings that you use when you're hitting. And if you're stable in the middle, probably the head's going to be a little bit quieter, and now the eyes can see clear, and you can pick up information about the pitch much easier and earlier. So it just allows you as a hitter um, to be, I guess, a little bit more free and athletic if the middle of the body is stable and under control, but also in a position to produce force.
Another thing that's key about the middle is it is the conduit between the lower and upper half. So having it be stable and tightening up that sling is key for adequate transfer of force up through it. And I love what you're doing with the water bags. It's kind of like the dynamic systems theory, Franz Bosch's dynamic systems theory, where you're changing the environment with the water bags. So for you guys that don't know, if you ever tried to do something with a water bag, it's a little bit, the water sloshing all over the place, and he has to change on the fly, just as if he would have to change on the fly if it's a pitch, just as if he have to change on the fly if he's landing in a hole in the box. The adjustability is key, and it has to happen fast. So using the water bags is really, really great. It's unbelievable for training the core. So I'm glad to hear you doing that. What are some takeaways that you began implementing system-wise at FDU? Because now you've got, some guys that may be working under you, So how do you capitalize on other guys' strengths within a system? You're putting systems down. I'm correct in assuming that, right?
I think it's just keeping the main thing. That's a Pat Riley quote, I'm pretty sure. But it's really just getting them to understand like how we structure practice and why those things are important. And I firmly believe, like I said earlier, I usually go out and I'll set up the machine for what we want to simulate in terms of velocity that day, or if we're going to see breakers out of the machine or whatever. But other than that, I'm confident that if I wasn't there for practice and the players had to set up our environments for hitting on that day, that they could do it, and it would look the same. So it's just getting them to value what Coach Manny and myself believe is important, and just making sure that that's the focus every day in practice. So I know that's I guess maybe an oversimplified answer, but
no, but it's great because you said the most important thing: when you're not there. So when you implement systems in place, there's an old saying, nobody goes to Burger King because Tony's making the burgers on Tuesday. You know what I mean? They've got a system that people like, right? So you can go there any day of the week, and no matter who's making the burgers, that they're the same burger, right? So we have to learn how to develop individuality within a system. And you said when you're not there, the guys set up and they've bought into this system. So now you can actually maximize their time even when you're not there. And that is a huge thing, in creating a system. How is your head coach from when you arrived? How's he? He must be loving you, dude.
Oh man, he's great, man. I mean, I can't even. First and foremost for him to be willing to bring me back. I mean, was I'm just I feel very fortunate first and foremost, but Manny and I work really well together. I think a lot of times we see the same things, and we process the game the same way. I mean, even from a recruiting standpoint, I think we like a lot of the same things in players. So he's been great. I mean, he's given me a lot of freedom, and he lets me do my thing. But he's also been he's been great. Like we work together. Like it's not all right, Ethan. You got the hitters, and I'm just going to stay over here. It's a partnership, and he's obviously the head coach and makes the final call with anything, whether it's an in-game move or something like that. But yeah, I think we work really well together, and like I said, kind of see the game through a pretty similar lens. So when it comes to developing our guys and how we practice and what we focus on, we're on the same page with that stuff.
Let's talk a little bit about hitting and mechanics. You guys have a strength and conditioning coach there, correct?
We do.
Right. Can you take us through some of the bullet points in your baseline assessment of hitters? And was your strength, I'm just curious, was your strength and conditioning coach open to learning about some of the movement stuff that you were bringing to the table, as even though you weren't a strength and conditioning coach?
Yeah, so our strength coach actually did an internship with Cressy Performance. So he has a baseball background, which is pretty cool. And
great.
In the fall, I mean, we have a big roster this year with some of the COVID waivers. We have 38 guys, and we lift in two groups. We split them up, pitchers and position players, but it's still a lot of people for just one coach to handle. So in the fall, I kind of made sure it was okay with him if I needed to help guys, make sure that they're doing an exercise a certain way or getting into a certain position appropriately. Again, that's not my educational background, but working at RPP for a year, I was able to take some things away that I knew I could apply right away and help him out with. And a lot of times if there was exercises or something our guys were doing and I had questions, he was always open to, explaining those things to me. So, I could not only learn, but then continue to help and just be another set of hands there.
I don't know if anybody realizes how huge that is, that a hitting coach can come into the weight room and help guys out with their form, especially at a school that has, one strength and conditioning coach and a lot of guys. That's a valuable thing to have.
Yeah. And then, I stay in my lane and the workouts are the workouts, but, it's more so just if there is a guy here or there, freshman that hasn't spent a lot of time in the weight room, just being able to kind of lend a hand or explain something a little better, a little differently so he can grasp it. I think it's helpful. And then in terms of assessing our hitters, we don't really do this is a 1 day assessment day. It's more so just those first few weeks where we're getting going and we're not in the team segment yet. So they're in smaller groups. It's just watching them go through their routine in the cage, watch them go through their prep work, seeing how they move, getting them on video and asking them some questions so I can kind of start to understand how they process information and what they think about when they're hitting and what's important to them. And that helps us have better conversations down the road, whether it's a mechanical thing or an approach thing or, we're changing something up with their prep work or whatever it is. But it's just kind of seeing, how they move and, evaluating ball flight and batting practice when we do take it on the field and what parts of the zone do they hit well, what do they struggle with. So it's kind of an ongoing process, especially throughout the entire fall, really, if it's new guys and if it's returners. It's, some of these guys, it's cool. This is the first time I've had some hitters for 3 or 4 years where some of these guys, understand how they move and their swings and their bodies so well that, with some of them, it can just be a quick cue or we're on the same page, a lot of times with that stuff, but with the new guys, just kind of analyzing them for a few weeks at a time. And that's the other thing too, you come in that first week of college and you're all gassed up and ready to go. You might be moving or performing differently in that week than you are a month in when we've now been lifting for a couple weeks and the body's starting to break down a little bit. If you're, again, a young guy that doesn't have a ton of experience in the weight room. And then after 3 weeks of team segment where we're competing and inter squatting and you've experienced some failure, you might be operating a little bit differently then too. So that's why that assessment process in terms of our hitters on the field, their on-field performance is an ongoing process.
You being able, once again, to analyze movement is key. So let's talk about that a little bit. When a guy starts, say, slumping, is there a protocol you go through in your mind in regard to finding the root or should we say the lowest hanging fruit of the problem? I know it's always different. Different guys slump for different reasons. It could be a mental thing. It could be whatever it is. But some guys seem to go straight to changing mechanics. And you and I both know that movement biases, may be playing a big factor in that as well. So what does Ethan Newton, when he looks at a guy and the guy's starting to have a hard time, he's having a bad week and then he starting to have another bad week. And what is your process for helping that athlete out? What is your thought process? What is the system that you go through in your mind?
Yeah, I got to try to get into their brain, see what they're thinking and what they're noticing and try to get a grasp for, just where they're at from the mental side. Because if they're feeling confident, it might just be all right. Maybe they're just getting pitched tough. Maybe pitchers are executing some pitches against them, and that one mistake that they're getting a day or an at bat they're missing, which is that's then another conversation or another thing that we can look at. But just getting in their brain and trying to see where they're at that time. And then from there, we can look at how they're being pitched. When they get their pitch and they miss it, how are they missing it? Like, why is that happening? So, and then a lot like has to start with timing and again the stability and the balance. Like if we're not in a stable position to pick up information as that pitcher's getting ready to deliver the ball, we're probably going to be fighting. We're going to be just trying to survive. So it definitely doesn't start with mechanics, but at the same time, it's like I hear this a lot, like, oh, like mechanics are good, but just not on time. Well, if you're not on time with your mechanics,
then your mechanics aren't good.
Yeah, and it's one and the same. So like, yeah, I'm moving well, da da da, but I'm late as well. Then there's an issue. Like there's an issue there. So it's just getting inside their brain a little bit, seeing how they're processing what's happening and staying on their side because I mean hitting is hard, and I tell them all the time, just have some grace for yourself. That was something I was not good with as a player. I mean, I beat myself up. It'd take me 24 hours or more before I'd recover from a bad performance, and that's not a good way to live, and it's not a good way to compete in this game. So just making sure that I'm staying on their side from that side of things, and then if we get to the point where we need to make a little adjustment with quote unquote mechanics, I mean, we'll just usually start with the setup. Like if there's a setup adjustment that we can make to help them start on time more consistently, that's a pretty good place to start, in my opinion, in the middle of the season.
By the time you realize he's slumping, he's already in his head. So, because he's slumping. So, is that's number one, right? Talk to the guy, get in his head.
And that's what, like, some guys want to watch videos. Some guys, it is more of just like, trying to get back in that mental headspace where they feel like they can compete with a clear mind. So, it's that's the psychological aspect of it, and that's where it gets really hard at this level. And if there's ever a time, in game where we're struggling with something as an offense, let's say it's, runner on third with less than 2 outs, and we're not getting that ball in play to score them, or we're struggling with whatever it is. I always start like, if we're not executing a hit and run, like, guys, I'm not going to stand up here and pretend that hitting is easy. Like I'm with you. It's difficult, but just letting them know, like, our expectations are still there and we expect them to perform at a high level, but it's not like me as the coach standing up on the pedestal looking down at you saying you need to figure this out. It's, we're in this thing together.
Right. That's good. It doesn't make them feel like they're sitting in a corner all by themselves,
Yeah.
That's really, really great. Let's talk about a few of the big players mechanic-wise that break players down and how you approach, or should I say attack these issues coaching and on the training side. So I just listed 3 things that I see all the time, and they're probably 3 of the biggest things that you see. So number 1, let's talk about a poor coil. When you see a guy and you're looking at video and you realize that he's actually not getting a good coil in his back leg. What are you attributing that to, or what are some of the things that you could attribute that to?
Yeah, the first is something we kind of already talked about, is what type of mover is he? So, is he a guy that generates and stores energy like in that part of his body, in the glutes and the hamstrings, and that's where he really generates his force, by being like, locked into the ground? Or is he a guy that's a little bit more bouncy and he maybe creates force and creates and stores energy more like in his back? And for that guy, he just might not be able to get into that coil or ride that coil out. So it's a matter of, if that's how he moves and he doesn't have the ability to really like get into that and move forward with that in his load, then maybe that's just not how he's going to move and produce force. So it's getting him to maximize his preference of movement and how he needs to be successful at the plate and generate force efficiently. If it's a guy who, he does need to be locked into the ground because that is where he generates his force from, and he's not doing it, to me, it's probably going to be a setup adjustment to where it makes it easier for him to get into that back hip and stay in it as he loads forward. Because if it's hard for him to work into it, it's probably going to be hard for him to stay in it. So if we can make a setup adjustment, again, for a guy that is how he's going to, generate his power and be adjustable and everything, then let's make a setup adjustment if we can.
That's an important thing. When you see a guy that's having a hard time coiling, the first thing you got to figure out is you got to go back and look at his movement assessment. And does this guy actually have the internal rotation to actually coil? Because if he is, like you said, a tight mover and he doesn't have IR, we're trying to pound that square peg into a round hole, right? And then we just got to make movement issues from there. How about guys that are stuck in their backside? Those guys that you kind of see, they've got a big angle when they swing. They're kind of stuck back there. They've got like an uphill swing.
More times than not, I do believe it starts with like understanding the concept of the load. The load a lot of times gets referenced as like that initial gather, like the negative move, and even I'll refer to it sometimes as that just out of habit. But in terms of understanding how the muscles in the body truly load when it comes to hitting, it's a process that happens as you move forward, or it's an active process where we're moving to load. It's not sitting on that backside and waiting for the pitch to arrive and then try to, all of a sudden unleash, because, we're in a tough spot to do that. And a couple of times I've even referenced the Proteus, since our guys did get on that in the fall for their assessment, and be like, yo, do you think it'd be easier to produce force, which mass times acceleration? Would it be easier to do that with 2 feet on the ground? Or if you're just on 1 foot and you're like 80-20, and think about the Proteus. If you had to move that thing as fast as you could, would that be easier to do, with 80% of your weight on your back foot, or would that be easier to do a little closer to 50-50? And some guys maybe aren't exactly there, but I think it starts with understanding, that concept of loading and getting to that point where you're going to fire the swing and be most explosive. And I think if they can get that, they usually start to kind of make some of those adjustments on their own.
Not only loading, but a lot of times I find you got to let guys know that you need to kind of stay loaded as you're moving, because that's the same situation as keeping 2 feet on the ground, shooting a cannon from a canoe. If you're on 1 foot, you know what I mean? Like there's no stability there.
Yeah. And some guys, like you said, keep staying loaded as you're moving. If that's hard for him to do, or his body doesn't really want to do that, then again, we can make a setup adjustment that makes it easier for him to do that. Where maybe the move is a little bit smaller, or again, if he's not a guy that's really going to be able to like ride out that coil and that's not how he produces force, then all right, let's just kind of keep your torso over the plate a little bit more so you still have balance and coverage, and we'll shorten that move a little bit to where you're not going to feel like you're on a raft in the middle of the ocean and then trying to hit a baseball moving at 90 miles an hour.
Once you can keep that posture and you can move your center of mass linearly, if you can keep the legs stable and you can keep tension in those legs, the upper body will not move around as much, and you can rotate on a more vertical axis, being your spine, and that will actually give you more maximum acceleration. And biggest factors in affecting adjustability.
I think it starts with not being in a position initially to see and move forward. So when you're starting, hitters start to pick up information when that pitcher's arm swing begins, and there might even be a couple things before that. Usually not at our level, but at the lower levels where you can pick up some information. But hitters start to pick up some information as that pitcher comes through with his arm swing, and then as that baseball pops up and is getting ready to release, we as hitters need to be in a stable position to where we can see. And if we're not in a position there where we can start to move forward when that ball is about to be released, vision's probably going to be compromised. And again, we're going to be playing catch up. So it's going to be, and that's on either side of that. So if I'm starting to move forward before I'm picking up information, well, what am I moving forward for? Like I'm not moving in sync with anything. I'm not on time with the baseball. If I'm still like gathering as that ball is getting ready to come out of the pitcher's hand, then I'm going to be late and I'm going to be scuffling a little bit. So it's making sure that that first move is on time and we're in a position where we're stable and we can pick up information as the ball is getting ready to be released. And if they're doing that, then the next thing I look at is kind of the next step in that baseball arriving to home plate. So it might just be them not really trusting what they see, and they're telling themselves the guy is going to throw a pitch here instead of just saying, all right, I'm gonna execute my plan. I'm gonna see it out of the hand. I'm gonna see it up out of the hand, whatever it is. They're like, all right, I want to make sure it's a fastball, so let me keep tracking it. All right, I think it's a fastball. Okay, now I go. Well, now I'm late and I'm fighting. Or if it's over aggressive and just telling yourself like he's gonna throw it here and I have to go and I have to swing, and then ends up being a breaking ball. You're going to be in a tough position to shut the swing down if you're not really trusting your move and trusting what you're seeing. So I'd say it starts there. And then, again, it comes back to helping each individual guy understand how they do buy time. Like some of our guys at FDU, they think about their hands and keeping their hands moving or keeping the hands back. Other guys don't think about their hands at all. It's going to be a little bit more about what's happening with the lower half and are they in a position there to kind of ride it out and buy some time. So just helping each individual guy understand, where they create energy and how they buy time.
Do you think sometimes as the season goes on, I notice it, the younger athletes that don't have the possibly possess enough lower body strength, or with more advanced athletes, as the season goes on and the lower body starts to get tired, they start to actually counter rotate more with their upper body because they know their lower half is tired. And then all of a sudden they're in a really highly counter rotated position with their upper body. And it makes them have to come around really fast. Cause like you said, they're kind of starting behind the line at this point. And now the pitch is coming and now they got to make a move really quickly. And it sacrifices adjustability. Do you ever find when guys start to lose their legs a little bit, they over counter rotate? That could be some of it.
With the time at RPP, and especially like moving through the spring season with with some of the high school athletes, I would see that where they're just trying to produce force or produce power any way that they can, and it might not necessarily be the most efficient way. I honestly think at our level, because we're pretty good with staying diligent about our weightlifting in season and our in season training. I think a lot of times it's actually the opposite for older guys, where they get away from trusting their move. Maybe they do feel a little bit tired, or the season's wearing on them a little bit, or they're a little bit banged up, so they try to simplify, which is good, but it actually ends up them just kind of taking away some of their rhythm and athleticism. So it's just making sure, again, if we have to make a little tweak as the season's going along, that's fine. But let's make sure that we're still putting ourselves in a position to see the ball well and be in rhythm with the baseball and still be athletic.
These have been some gems from Ethan Newton. Thank you, Ethan. It's always great speaking with you. How can guys follow you on social media, or how can people reach you if they need to?
Yeah, I'll be happy to share my email. It's e.newton@fdu.edu. And then on Twitter is also a good way. It's enewton_FDU. Anybody that reaches out, I'll do my best in getting back, but that's something that that's important to me.
You can reach me at Nunzio Signore on Twitter. You can reach my facility at RPP_baseball on Twitter and on Instagram. Our website is rocklandpeakperformance.com. And if you don't know, I have a book out on velocity-based training, how to apply science, technology, and data to maximize performance. It's released by Human Kinetics, and you can get it on Amazon. We've been talking with assistant coach Ethan Newton for FDU. Ethan, thanks for being on, man. It's always a pleasure seeing you and talking to you.
Thank you for having me. This was a great honor to be on Behind the Scenes podcast. I saw you start this thing a year ago.
Yeah, man. I'm telling you. I think I'm learning more than the listeners. It's unbelievable. You were asking me about prepping for these things. But guys, we'll see you on the next episode of Behind the Scenes podcast.